Hey there. Good morning. Today I want to talk about how do you develop proficiency using Santray with children and adolescents. I also include families, groups. I've used Santray in groups with children and families, with adults, with children and adolescents. Today, though, I want to talk about using Santray therapy, which is an expressive arts modality in the mental health field, how to develop proficiency using Santray specifically with children and adolescents, because their developmental needs do influence the way in which they use and engage in the Santray therapy process. So, if you're joining me today, let's see who's here. Go ahead and post your name in the comments. Where are you from? What population do you work with? And if you're watching on the replay, go ahead and post there as well. So, how many of you if you're in the mental health field and you're working with children and adolescents, maybe even adults, how many of you are using Santray therapy? And if you have been using it, for you, what's been your most helpful investment of time and money to help you feel confident? Because to me, that was the big thing for me getting started. I took Santray training. It was 3 days, really intensive, and got a really good grounding. And then it took ongoing supervision, consultation, and ongoing trainings in order to continue developing my proficiency. First, though, I really had to get a grounding. And so to me, that was worth the time and investment so that I had a framework to know what I was doing and to use it ethically. So for you, if you were to give a tip for new people just getting started, what would you say is the most beneficial thing you did for your investment of your time and money? Hey there, Shirley from the UK. Oh, 4 to 16-year-olds. Yes, that's the population that you work with. Using Santray. Awesome. Very intensive, but amazing. Shirley, if you were to pass along a tip for people coming up, just getting started, what would you say is your what tip would you give for developing skills, investment and time and money? What tip would you give for people if they want to learn how to use Santray therapy effectively? Hey, Cinnamon, how are you? Good to see you here. Yep, working with children. How are you doing, Cinnamon? So Cinnamon was in my previous training, Getting Grounded. And Cinnamon, what was one tip or one thing for you from the Getting Grounded that kind of stuck with you to help you get started with children and adolescents? If you're, go ahead and post that if you're up for it. All righty. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with me, I'm Kathy Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a registered play therapist supervisor here in the U.S. with almost 30 years experience in the mental health field, working with children, adolescents, and families. And I love using play therapy and expressive arts. Santray is one of my most favorite things. Art and poetry are my other expressive arts favorites. And I love using play therapy with children. So if you're also watching, I'm also live streaming to LinkedIn, my private Facebook group for mental health professionals using play therapy and expressive arts, which is called Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground. And I'm also streaming to YouTube. So if you're watching, if you find this helpful, please go ahead and like and share it with others. All righty. So Cinnamon said, doing great. how to choose supplies was very helpful. You know what, Cinnamon, when I do the foundational training, that's when I get asked a lot how to choose the supplies. And for those of you who are watching, I did do a previous live episode on that, so you may want to check that one out. You can always find them on my YouTube channel now. Alrighty, so today I want to talk about how to get proficient. What do you need to do in order to really develop confidence and skill using this modality? And for me, Santre is an expressive arts modality, which means it's projective in nature. And for me, because it's projective in nature, I think it's really, really important to get training and consultation, because these are the key to help you using it effectively and grounding it in some kind of a framework, because theory drives application. That's my number one thing. Even when you're using an integrated approach, theory drives application. And most of us use an integrated approach. If you stop and think about it, if using an integrated approach, if you stop and think about it, the interventions that you're using have a theory framework to them. And so to me, it's nice to be intentional about thinking, if I'm using a certain intervention, what's the theory model behind it? Because that's going to help me make sure that I'm applying it accurately and effectively. The same is true with Santre therapy, even when we're integrating Santre therapy. So Facebook user says, getting training as it's more involved than originally thought. Yes, choice of symbols and how to use them. And I think that's a really, really good point about the training, because I think especially when we're first getting started, we don't necessarily know all the little nuances of it. And so the training helps to provide us with the knowledge and gives us some skill to get started. And then ongoing consultation and supervision and training helps to build on top of that foundation that we get. So I think those are really important things as well. Choice of symbols, yes, that's a big thing too, because it's really expensive. You can see from all my Santre miniatures behind me, I have a ton. I've been collecting these for, how long is 2003? What is that, 18 years? So yeah, and it was pricey to get started. So knowing specifically what symbols to get and why, and I like to talk about where to get them too, because to me, getting a good deal is like going on a treasure hunt, and I like a good deal. Alrighty, so the other thing is about Santre therapy, I think is really important to understand is there are some basic principles that apply across the board when you're using expressive arts modalities, including Santre therapy. And it's important to understand even these basic principles, because the basic principles help you identify what's clinically relevant, recognizing what specific themes, what makes a theme. Like one of the things that I like to do in my initial trainings for Santre therapy is we really break down the what to look for in the Santre. I mean, really break it down. And one of the reasons I like to do that is because as mental health professionals, we get used to just kind of going into interpretation mode right away. And with Santre therapy, what I found is if we don't have an idea of what to look for specifically in the Santre and really break it down to get that understanding, then when we give our interpretation, even in our head, we don't necessarily know how we got that. So if we're asked, well, because it's projective. So we have to be careful with that, so that we don't not miscue, but misread, and then we're going to misinterpret what may or may not be there. So I found breaking it down is a really important thing. And across all of that's a basic thing across across expressive arts. So learning what to look for, learning the developmental, especially with children, there are developmental stages for children, which makes sense. So the way in which a 5-year-old engages in the sand tray is going to look much different typically than like a 10-year-old, because developmentally they're different and they do show up that way. The other thing that's really helpful to know about the developmental parts of things, if you see, let's say you have an 8-year-old in the sand tray, and the tray, the play that they're engaging in the sand tray process is kind of more indicative of maybe developmentally a 5-year-old, that gives you a lot of good information about their social emotional development. So Facebook user said charity shops and car boot sales. Here I think in the US, we would call those yard sales and thrift shops. I love going to yard sales and thrift shops to get my sand tray miniatures. I can get such good deals. And it's summertime, and I tell people, if you are working on your miniature collection development, summertime is the best time, because people who have children are getting rid of their children's toys. The thing is, though, you have to be very intentional about the ones that you get, so that you don't waste money and then kind of have a lot of symbols in your collection that aren't really relevant. If you're working with children and adolescents, though, the likelihood they'll probably be relevant is high, and you still want to be very, very intentional about that. So yeah, those are all things that are important to make sure that you understand, and training will help you to know what specifically you need to get for your miniature collection, how to store them, all of those kinds of things. And there are some of the other basic principles across the board are going to be, so what are the developmental aspects of play in the sand tray, and at different stages, what's typical for that stage of development in the sand tray process? What are some of the common patterns that we see in children that are going to be different than adolescents or even adults? And then how do you recognize clinically relevant themes, which is what I was talking about in the trainings that I like to do, is we really break that down so that you know what to look for. And the other part of that is, once you know what to look for, then you have to kind of clinically hold that. And how do you hold that? What do you say to clients? What do you not say to clients? Because you don't want to, I call it stepping all over their unconscious content. And because it is an expressive modality, it's important to make sure that you have that framework in order to know how to hold that, what to look for, what's clinically relevant, what that may be indicating a social emotional challenge or difficulty, or what's a resiliency, what are some of the resiliency things to look for, so that you can see that your clients are doing well, because you really want to make sure you find those and focus on those, because those are the things that we want to help support, to help them develop that resiliency over time as they grow. That's the long-term goal, is helping to develop resiliency for future challenges, so that they can manage those a lot more effectively. The thing is, even if you're using an integrated approach, you still need to have that framework, and those basic principles are still true and relevant even when you're using an integrated approach, and maybe you're using prompts to use it in a more of a directive manner, you're still having to use that basic framework and those basic principles to understand what's going on for your client. And the thing is, without getting the training and consultation, you may get lost. I got lost so often when I was getting started, and the training and the supervision or consultation was key. I was lost so much, especially in the beginning. But even initially, when you're getting the training so that you have the knowledge part, still having the ongoing training or supervision helps to take that theory, take that framework, and apply it to a variety of client presentations, because we get the lower acuity, more well-functioning children in outpatient mental health. We also can have the higher acuity families that have a lot more challenges and take a lot more time to help them through that process. So having that framework, to me, I love a good framework. A framework helps me navigate through the decision-making process. So having that framework, knowing how to hold that projective modality, that projective content, to me is key. So one of the ways that I see that in the trainings, when I do Santre trainings, and the Santre trainings that I focus on initially are really, really helping people get grounded and get that solid foundation. To me, that's really important. And when you're working with children and adolescents, in the trainings that I do with children, with mental health professionals to help them use it specifically for children, we're really looking at that developmental aspect as well, and also doing more work in knowing what to look for, how to break it down, how to hold that, holding the polarities, as Eliana Gill would say, to help us navigate through that clinical decision-making process. So in the trainings, one of the things that we do is we'll break it down. And what I notice is their therapists will, because that's what we're trained to do, like I mentioned previously, we'll go immediately to interpretation. The problem with that is you don't have anything to back it up with, and you may be wrong. You may be right. It may be both. That's possible as well. But if you can't articulate and if you can't identify what is going on in the Santre, it makes it more challenging for you to be able to do your clinical decision-making process. Here's the thing, though. In the end, if we hold sacred space, if we hold effectively creating that safe and secure space, ultimately, it really is about the client being able to use it to help them navigate through the process. Our job is not to get in the way. That's kind of how I look at it. Ultimately, just like play therapy, basic principle across the board for most play therapy modalities, given the free and protected space, our clients will naturally move towards healing and wholeness. Some of the more directive play therapy and expressive arts modalities may kind of hold that differently, so to speak, but the vast majority of expressive arts modalities and play therapy, the theory is if you provide that free and protected space, our clients will naturally move towards healing and wholeness. And our job is not to get in the way, so to speak. So to me, that's where the training and consultation comes in. And in my opinion, if you're taking a Santre training, and even an expressive arts training, I think it's really important that you have the opportunity to create some of your own sand trays, because then you realize how powerful it is and how deep you can go in that process. I remember the first time I went to a sand tray training. I went because my friend, who I trusted, she was really grounded. My friend said, go to this training. And I had seen what she was doing and I wanted to learn it. I couldn't find any trainings anywhere. This was a very, very long time ago, a couple decades. And so she told me this sand tray training. In my head, I was thinking, it's kind of hooey. Like, is it really legitimate? And she assured me it was legitimate. And so I went, but I was kind of skeptical. And in the training, we did a lot of our own sand trays. We got a lot of the theoretical framework and knowing what to look for and how to hold it and how to process, what to say, what not to say. We did a lot of our own sand trays, though. And that's really where I realized how powerful it was in doing my own sand tray work. And so I've continued to do that because I think it's really important. I learned some more skills. Plus, I also get to do some of my own work, which really just makes me a better therapist, the way that I kind of look at it. So as a recap, the thing is, sand tray therapy is a projective modality like any other modality. And there are some fundamental principles of sand tray that are important to know to at least get you grounded. So for those of you watching, what's the thing for you that helped you get really, really grounded using sand tray, where you understood the power of it? You had a good idea of the principles of it. What helped you to do that? So Facebook user says, my first sand tray was so emotional. I cried, but good to see inside myself. That is so true, because that first sand tray training, by the end, I was transformed. Not only a huge believer in how powerful this modality is, but just for myself as a professional and personally making a shift, because I was going through a hard issue at the time, and it really helped me to get clarity and make that shift. And so from then on, there was that person that I did the training with years ago. She only did the 3-day intensive, and I knew I needed more. I knew I needed ongoing to help me figure out how to use this well. Sand tray well. And so there was another person, and I would go and take my sand tray trainings periodically, getting more grounded in a theory model. And the theory model she used was more Jungian psychoanalytic, which I love, by the way. And it got to the point I didn't even wear makeup, because I knew by the end of that sand tray training, not only was I going to learn some things, I was going to be cleaning out some emotional baggage. I was going to be having a really good cry. And the person who did the trainings, she was awesome about it. So when we started, I would grab a Kleenex box. I would plop it down next to my sand tray that I was working on for myself. And I would do my work. I learned a lot, and I got cleaned out a lot too. Some emotional stuff. And that only helps us two things. Helps us understand how incredibly powerful it is. And the reason that's important is because if we understand how incredibly powerful it is, we're going to be way more intentional about holding that sacred space and make sure we're managing not only what's going on for our client, we're going to be managing what's going for us as a therapist, so that we can hold that space really effectively for them and not kind of step all over their process and get in the way. So yes, totally agree about that. So the other thing is being grounded in a framework is what helps us to do that clinical decision making and know how to apply. To me, theory, framework, having a framework, that helps drive the application because we're applying it to individual people. So it may look different from one person to another. And that's important to keep in mind. And then the other thing is there are some basic principles across the vast majority of ways in which people use Santray. And that is developmentally, children and adolescents and even adults engage are influenced based on their development, what developmental stage they are. And if you see something that's more typical of a 10-year-old, more typical of a 5-year-old, and your client is a 10-year-old, that gives you really helpful information. And also helps you know how the framework also helps to know how to recognize clinically relevant themes, helps you know common patterns that are seen in children when they're creating their Santray. That's kind of a developmental thing as well. Children and adolescents engage differently in Santray, and children based on their age and development engage. You'll see different themes and different ways in which they engage. And so it's important to know what's the typical and what might fall outside of that typical. And also the other thing is across the board using Santray and having a framework, the basic principles include how to hold a Santray, how to create that sacred space, and how to make sure you're not stepping all over the projective content of your client. So that is it for today. Thank you for joining. If you have found this helpful, please like and share it across your social media platforms. And if you're interested, I do have another training coming up. This one is using Santray in play therapy with children and teens. So we're going to really look more at some of the developmental aspects of working with children. We'll also do more of learning how to identify clinically relevant themes in the Santray. What do you do with that? How do you hold that? And then also that's coming up in August, so August 21st. If you're interested, I will put a link to that in the comments below. Also, I do have an online supervision group. We meet twice a month on the second and fourth Saturday of each month. And that's another really helpful way to continue growing your skills, learning how to look for relevant themes in the Santray with different clients. And you get a lot of support doing that and taking what you learn in trainings and applying that with your various clients. And then lastly, if you're interested, I have a free PDF of must-have Santray miniatures where I kind of talk about what categories of miniatures you need, how to store them, why that's important, just to kind of help with that, because that one, there are a lot of different thoughts about that. I kind of share what I found to be useful. You can see in my background here how I store my miniatures. So if you're interested in that PDF, I will post a link to that in the comments. If you're interested in the online supervision consultation group, feel free to private message me, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.